Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. So we continue with our class on healthy relationships by Rachel Chapman, and we are going back to discuss chapter 5, which is dealing with building a deeper connection. Last time we talked, we didn't go into much detail. We covered some of the points that she was making in brief, and so we wanted to go back, given that this is one of the main issues that we find in marriages, the issue of building a connection. The issue of building a connection, a deeper connection, is something that seems to be missing in many relationships. So, one of the things that she brings up is that there should be 5 areas of conversation that a relationship should have. So she says that 5 conversations that you should have with your partner are the following. And we mentioned this last time, but we want to go back. The idea of I can't read your mind, so what should I do? So basically, what she's bringing up is that at times we are assuming that we understand the other person, right? If you want to come up, you can come closer. Sure. Yeah, then bring this. So at times we're assuming that we understand the other person. And this is one of the biggest mistakes that we can make in a relationship, is to constantly assume that we understand where the other person is coming from, especially if there is not a deep connection with that person or good understanding of where that person is coming from. If there's a lot of conflicts and there's a lot of disconnects, we can't necessarily assume where the other person is coming from. But if the relationship is healthy and if the relationship is connected mentally, spiritually, emotionally, then it's easier to kind of assume where the other person is coming from. But even in that case, assuming where others are coming from can be very dangerous. So she says to avoid conflicts and to understand your partner, is necessary to be clear on what it is that their needs are. To be clear on what their needs are. And your partner needs to understand, right, that you're not in a position to read their mind. And that means that if you're not in a position to read their mind, that means that there has to be some communication wherein the partner is explaining to you on their own terms, not on your terms, what it is that they need in the relationship. And this happens that people begin to talk about their needs in the relationship when the relationship is pretty much at its end. Sometimes throughout the relationship, things are mentioned, but then when it comes to the issue of the actual listening to what it is that's being said, we find that whatever was expressed was ignored. So usually when the relationship is coming close to talaq or is at that point of talaq and they're trying to reconcile, then everybody all of a sudden becomes talkative. And usually in the wrong way. Usually in the way of arguing and fighting and so on and so forth. So she's saying that also, if you have certain expectations, this is a big one. Those things should be made clear. Some expectations a person has of their partner, but they never tell them their unspoken expectations. And so they're measuring the partner based on that which they have within themselves that's not clear as a measurement of where their partner should be. So there's 2 things here. One is your partner may not actually know your needs. And the other thing is that there's expectations that are beginning now to govern the relationship, and none of that is talked about. So if none of that is talked about, we know that the end game or the end result of that type of situation is going to be conflict. So she says most of the time, the reason we get upset with our partners is that we think that they should know what we want. And we shouldn't have to remind them now and then. And again, we said that even in relationships that are healthy, where people can kind of assume that the other person knows where you're coming from, even there, when the communication breaks down and you're not expressing yourself so that the other person understands what your needs are and what the expectations are, so on and so forth, then it just becomes a mess. So and unfortunately, this is not part of many people's marriage, right? It's not normal to most cultures, to most marriage. Things have changed in today's time. We have to realize that. In the past, roles were clearly defined, and because roles were clearly defined, they were defined by the culture. How to be a man, how to be a husband, how to be a woman, how to be a wife. It was defined very clearly. Another thing is that people were not in the mode of necessarily thinking that how they feel is important. So most of the time what happened in relationships is that they would stay quiet. And then if the role expectations were very set, you know what I'm saying? It was the issue that the man, he ran everything, the woman just followed, and that was it. But in a time period, even though Islamically, we know that that's not necessarily healthy, even though in some Muslim cultures they run like that. But Islamically, we find that in the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he engaged in shura. We find that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam was considerate of the people of his family. He always encouraged that the best of you is the one that treats their family the best. That type of principle. And you find that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam was one that he uh, shared in the responsibilities in the household, and he still kept his manhood. There was no problem. We find that his wives, they expressed themselves. He knew when they had issues with him. That stuff was clear. But unfortunately, the the rules or the ethics or the mannerisms of the Prophet ﷺ, we find that that stuff was lost throughout Islamic history. The liberation that the Prophet ﷺ brought to the Arabian Peninsula, to men and to women, and especially to women, that died. That became something that became in the background. And we begin to see more and more a situation in which the rights of women are put to the side. That's why we have a lot of imbalance. Even in the Muslim community, we have heavy imbalance. But here, the idea is that we should be communicating with each other and be sensitive with each other's needs. And if that doesn't happen, we find what find in today's time. Long-term marriages collapse. And that's the complaint that we hear over and over again. My needs are not being met. Now, what happens as a consequence of that is that once it gets to that situation, you've been in 15 years, 13 years, 20 years, and then it gets to divorce. Now, when that person comes out of that relationship, they don't want to hear anything. You understand what I'm saying? They're not, now they have a whole list of expectations. And whoever can't meet those expectations is a no-go. And it's not possible to build a relationship like that. That's why a lot of people are staying single. Rather than key behaviors that are healthy for the relationship, they're looking for every detail to be met. When she's saying that we have to communicate. The section is entitled "Building a Deeper Connection." It's not to be assumed that those things are in place so the connection is automatic. This is one of the biggest issues that we have when it comes to preparing people for marriage. That people have the assumption that the person that they're going to marry is going to be perfect with all of the qualities that they want, and that's it. That's impossible to see. You understand what I'm saying? Realize, to see in the flesh. We have to be in a situation where the question is, what can we work with? And the issue of willingness. And see, there's the risk. People are not willing to take the risk because of the issue of people not wanting to change. They know that some people, how they are, that's it. And they're not going to change, so they don't want to take the risk. That's why they have a list of expectations. But that's not healthy. Everybody has to change in a relationship. The question is, what is healthy change? And the question is, what is bad change? We all have to continue to grow, and she brings that up. She brings that up in the other chapters, that we have to invest in the relationship. Part of investing in the relationship is investing in ourselves. The Muslim is constantly changing. That's part of Iman. If we only stay at one level and that's it, and we never talk about transforming ourselves, and we never look into transforming ourselves, that's a big problem. The Muslim has to always be studying and understanding himself and herself and seeing where they can improve intellectually, physically, emotionally, in health, in business, in every angle, right? And that's why we have the concept of husn Islam al-Mar, tarikuhu ma la ya'ni. That from a person's perfecting of their Islam, meaning bettering their practice of Islam, is that they focus on what they need to focus on. They're not distracted by what is not the priority of the moment. And so the other thing that she talks about, so the first conversation is, I can't read your mind. So the needs be to make clear, and the expectations need to be made clear. And setting expectations, we have to be careful how we do that. That's a conversation in and of itself. Things should not be unrealistic. That's why marriage is a partnership in which people are developing themselves in that process. The other issue that she mentions is show me how to love you. Get to know your partner, right? So she says the issue of your partner teaching you how to love them is extremely important. Why? Because everybody doesn't define love in the same way. There's some things that are clear that Islam describes as love, and then there's personalized definitions, right? So some people feel as though if you are providing for them, that's love. Other people feel as though if you are talking to them, that's showing that you love. Other people, if you give them, time, right, then they consider that to be love. So that's the reality that we find, that there's different understandings of love. In Islam, we have the concept, none of you truly believes until you love for your brother and your sister, including that, what you love for yourself. And so from there, we learn that the akhlaq of Islam, or the character of Islam, how we treat people, that's why it's important to take the Prophet Muhammad والسلام, as a model. How is it that the Prophet والسلام, treats people? If we understand how it was that the Prophet ﷺ treated people, then we begin to have a healthy understanding of love. If not, we leave it at the point of people's personal definitions of what love is. And if we leave it at the level of what people's personal definition of love is, if that person has never been in a healthy relationship with their parents, with their friends, even with themselves, they may not know how to love properly. Especially, and that's where we start to get into the issue of trauma and so on and so forth. So she says the idea is to use what works best for your partner and show them that you care for them, right? By asking them to teach you, what does love mean to you? How do you want love expressed? She says this works because many of us feel unloved or ignored in a relationship only because our partner fails to show us love in the way we understand or expect it. It doesn't mean that because you feel that you're not loved in the relationship always, right? It's not. There's some situations in which you're actually not being loved, but there's some situations in which you may not feel loved, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not being loved. It just may mean that your partner doesn't understand what it is that you mean by love and how it is that you should be loved. And that's why we say that the default position here is that if we were taking on the character of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and how he treated people, we would fulfill a lot of what it means to be loved. But still, if that is not enough, people have to explain to you what it is that they feel comfortable with regard to the issue of love. Even the issue of intimacy, and we talked about intimacy at its various levels, right? And especially within the context of husband and wife. This is a major problem because everyone's definition of intimacy is not the same. So people need to talk about intimacy. That's just a reality. And that's what she mentions. Here, she also says another conversation that should be had is, I want you to tell me how to make you feel better. A lot of times we begin to assume things, and we mentioned that already, in the relationship, thinking we know our partners well and that there's nothing wrong with them. And that could be misleading. So, that's why communication is important. Because some people may hold things in and never speak. And if they don't feel safe enough, you'll never know. Until years later, when that explodes and it becomes a situation in which the relationship completely collapses. And that's why she started off the whole book with the issue of active listening. When we're actively listening to our partner and there's freedom to be able to communicate and there's openness to communicate on every level, then it's possible to understand where the other person is coming from, and it's possible for that person to express themselves when they feel hurt or when they feel in pain. I'm going to say something to you. If we're damaging our relationships by entering into our relationships, the haram, meaning doing haram deeds or haram actions, is not going to go anywhere, because that's going to break trust. It's going to break the trust of the people. And one of the things that she also mentions, you know what I'm saying, is the issue of physical intimacy specifically. She mentions that, and she brings that up again because she was just talking about intimacy from the angle of basic affection, so on and so forth. But she brings up the issue that people, if they fail to be physically intimate and they fail to talk about that leads to the haram. Although she doesn't say the haram because she's not Muslim, but she says infidelity. So one of the things that comes along with that is a lack of love and affection, right? And in any form, when that takes place, it could lead the marriage to be less valued, right? And that's why she says building intimacy in a relationship is key for a couple, right? And part of that is being appreciative of your couple, appreciating the person that you're living with. Don't just treat them like an object, or don't just treat them as your servant or whatever, but appreciate them. When you show appreciation, taqdeer, then you honor that person becomes valuable. And showing gratitude. It's not just showing gratitude. Show that you're thankful for that person to be in your life. That's how we start to build connections with each other. But when we undervalue each other and we treat each other bad, of course everything is going to break down. So one thing she says, that we all crave that, to be valued. We all crave to be appreciated. But by expressing that appreciation and that gratitude, that changes the marriage completely. The other thing is to be supportive, especially when people are going through difficulty in life or sickness or whatever it may be that they're going through. We've seen situations, I've seen the case in which a person, and I won't mention who they are and all that type of stuff, so in case they listen, they won't feel embarrassed. But one time, I know a situation in which one partner in the relationship asked for divorce when the other partner lost their mother. So that person is going through a divorce, needing the support of their partner, and the partner asked for a divorce during that time, right? So that can show you to at what level this has reached. The lack of communication, the breakdown of the relationship, the lack of appreciation, the lack of thankfulness, all of that reached that point that in the time of hardship, there was the time of hardship, no support was shown. That's the end of the relationship at that point. But it's an extreme example to show how sometimes we can be extremely cold. And a lot of times we're extremely cold because there's things taking place in the relationship that make us that way. Right. And so that's what has to be determined. I know another situation where one of the partners was in the hospital, and the other partner left that partner in the hospital alone. And that partner asked for, can you come with me to the hospital? And the partner said no. So in that time of hardship is one in which there's no support, right? And so that can kill your relationship. If you're going through a hard time and the partner that you're with or the person you want to marry is not showing any empathy or any sensitivity to what it is that you're going through, that can create a situation where memories will be built for the future, that what took place in the past, that person didn't care about me, that person didn't love me, that person didn't support me, none of that. So she says, as important as appreciation is in any form, so is showing support. If your partner is going through something difficult, such as a health condition, grief, mental trauma, or emotional instability, it's your job as their partner to support them both emotionally and physically. You don't always have to use words, but sometimes just sitting by their side and letting them know with your actions, right? That's important. Because sometimes too, if you are saying that I'm supportive or that I love you, that type of thing, but your actions, differ from what you're saying, it doesn't mean much at all. It doesn't mean much that in your words you're saying I love you, this, that, because if all your actions are actions that don't show that you really care about the person, it's not going to go anywhere. That's why our words and our actions have to match as much as possible. And we have to learn how to approach our partner in different ways, because our partner may only know one way because of what they learned in their families. That's why we say, this is a conversation that is amongst some of the imams. Most of us are not prepared for marriage. We can know what we want in marriage. We can know what we have to have a mahar. We know that there's rights. We know that we have to have economics. But to actually be prepared for marriage, to deal with another human being and live with that human being, is impossible. Some of us think that happiness has to be the responsibility solely of the partner. But a lot of times we don't realize that the problem that we have is not that the partner is not making us happy, is that we're not happy with ourselves. Is that we really don't know what love is. We really don't know how to be in the relationship. That doesn't mean that our partner now has the right to just say, I shouldn't try to make you happy. But happiness ultimately only can come from Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. But in the relationship, we have to know how to treat one another. And part of that, knowing how to treat one another, it brings some sense of happiness. When you find that someone is there for you, they support you, right, in your time of difficulty, and other than that, they listen to you, they actually pay attention to you, they actually understand where you're coming from, right? It's not just the issue of broken down communication. That creates happiness. That creates a sense of happiness. Happiness, in many instances, for human beings, comes from being recognized. It comes from being appreciated. It comes from people treating you well. It comes from connection with people. In this society, that barely exists. That's why you find everybody is inclining towards depression, and people are inclining towards suicide. They're inclining towards drugs and all kinds of things. And to be honest with you, in this society as well, people begin to think that that's solvable. Pardon the word, but they think that that's solvable with physical intimacy, with sex. That's not going to be solved with sex. No way, because there's a disregard for every part of the human being. The human being in Islam is composed of different things. It's not composed of one thing. The human being is composed of instincts. The human being is composed of emotions. The human being is composed of thoughts. You understand what I'm saying? We have a body. We have a soul. There's no way that you can only address one part of the human being and think that that's going to be a healthy relationship with that human being. And one of the dynamics, when she talks about building a deeper connection, a lot of times it's not talked about, is what is our relationship to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala together? You find, I guarantee you, when you talk to people about divorce, most of the time you ask them, did you pray together? What was it that you did to build your life for the Lord together? You find most people don't have any relationship together with Allah in that point. So by the time they get to divorce, they didn't have anything to support their relationship with. There's no reference point. It's just what I want, what you want. And it becomes a battle between what you want, what I want. But what's healthy for us in the relationship, as far as what marriage is in Islam, the objective for marriage in the Quran, what we see marriage should be like in the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as far as his example is concerned. when that is missing as a reference point, of course, it's just going to be a battle between two different people. That's
What do you think about couples that have difference in opinion as far as how they practice, as far as a sect or idea? Maybe she was brought up in a family where they believe this way and I believe this way. What do you?
that's a big issue, because if that's a problem amongst the Muslims, he was asking what 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 do we think about the whole issue of couples where one spouse practices one way and the other spouse practices another way, or they have two different ideas about how to practice deen? And part of the problem that comes in with that is that either the husband wants to change the wife, right? Or somebody got weak in the relationship, like somebody's maybe their practice is a little weak, or there's not compassion. Somebody may be a no Muslim, or somebody may have struggled with the deen, or both of them may have not been practicing. I knew a situation where the couple, both of them were not practicing. They found each other pretty much in the club. One was born a Muslim, the other one was not born a Muslim. Then they got married. Then they started to practice. Then one person is practicing, and they what? They want to be strict on the other person. The other person, you didn't find them like that. You found them when both of y'all were using drugs. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And don't think that this is just a Calvert phenomenon. This is in the Muslim community overall. Right? You have people that have struggles, but these are things we don't talk about. And so at the end, what happens? The phone call comes about what? About divorce. Or about how this person is treating me this way or that way. No. The reality is that when those changes come, let's go back to the center, the question. The marriage has to be based on an understanding that's shared and flexibility. Some things are personal. You see what I'm saying? In terms of your relationship with Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. So you can't expect the same degree of strictness in every situation. It's impossible for that to be the case. That's why we have to, our understanding of the deen, we have to understand what is the objective of marriage. If a person is a Muslim and they're staying within the marriage with the basic values of Islam, keeping the marriage together, it is practicing the deen. Not that we wear this color or that we do this thing, or you see what I'm saying? We have to have enough flexibility between each other to allow each other to breathe. But before people getting married, if there was no understanding of compatibility, you see what I'm saying? Then it doesn't go anywhere. And the problem that we have is a lot of the groups, they don't consider the impact that they have when it comes to marriage. You get what I'm saying? So the way that they teach in such a way for the individual. They don't teach for the family, and they don't teach for the community. So a lot of times how people are teaching is about me only, Islam. They don't teach that part of Islam is how we deal with each other. Mu'asharat wal mu'amalat. How is it that we treat each other, and what are the rules to deal with each other? You see what I'm saying? So then in the marriage, in that case, if one person begins to read, and say for instance they grew up studying one aqidah or one belief system or one way of thinking about Allah, and the other person is learning another way. Nobody's ever talking about if you begin to think in this way and the other person doesn't think in this way. They're not saying be easy with your spouse. They're not saying, you know what I'm saying, that person may have another. They're saying is wrong. There was a case one time, some years back, where one of the groups was going around and telling sisters that because your husband doesn't practice a certain aqidah, you have to leave him, or you have to leave them. And they're both Muslims in a Muslim marriage. So what is it that we're trying to achieve in that regard? So that's a big deal. We always have to think about al-ma'alat. What are the consequences about what we're doing? Because when we're building a family, is a bigger responsibility than just me only taking care of my personal responsibilities in the deen. When we're building a family, we have to know what the objectives of the marriage are, right? We have to know that mercy and love is part of the objectives of the marriage. We have to know that protecting one another is part of the objectives of the marriage. It's not only the issue with religiosity, it's the issue with the haram too. When we start to engage in the haram and then we bring that into the household, you see what I'm saying? And it's not, some people engage in the haram, but they want to make it part of the household. You see what I'm saying? They want to make it like it's normal in the house. It's not that they keep it quiet to themselves. They make it like it's part of the household. Once they do that, then they create a situation where they're imposing themselves. It's the same thing with religiosity. Some people bring in religiosity, a form of practicing the deen that they have, and it's not necessarily something that Islam obligates. It's what they want to practice, and they try to impose it. Like the concept of practicing with shadda, practicing the issue with real strictness. So then what happens? There's no going out. Everything, because everything is haram. Like in summertime, we know what happens in the summertime, right? If we can't be clear that we live in that type of society, we're not going to go to Great Adventure. We're not going to go to the park. We're not going to go to the beach. We're not going to do anything. Why? Because the society is a mixed society with all kind of values. Who can live like that? Who can live solely that you're just living in your small apartment in some of these places, right? Or your small home? You see what I'm saying? Who's going to live like that? How are you going to build the relationship? If some of the youth are complaining that they're locked in the house and that's all that they're doing and they're going crazy. What about couples? You see what I'm saying? So we have to realize that we live in a society that has problems. So we have to be able to know how to be flexible with each other and try to practice one another. I know people want to be strict because they think that that's the way where there's clarity and this and that. But a lot of times you can only do that for so long, right? It's fine. Sometimes you do extra salah. It's fine you do extra fasting, right? It's fine that you do extra Quran. But if that's the only thing you're doing and you're obligating everybody only to that and the rest of life is gone, that type of religiosity is going to break the relationship, especially with women and children. Because children, they need outlets. Children need to understand a healthy concept of fun. The same thing with wives. So the brother, in this case, because a lot of times the brother is going to be the one to impact, that doesn't mean that the sister doesn't have that issue too. I've seen that with mothers sometimes. They make life so complicated for the children that the children are going crazy. This haram, that's haram, this haram. Can't do this. That's not against the deen. Those children are going to be the first children to hit the street. Yeah. And the issue of the wives, when the only thing that you're doing is everything is haram or you can't enjoy life, then what ends up happening is that ends in divorce because it's not healthy. You understand what I'm saying? It's not healthy.
Those conversations aren't really had like nowadays. People don't sit down and talk about, with lifestyle and things like that. People don't take it into account, like the lifestyle of the person as a Muslim. Because we all have different lifestyles.
Well, what has happened is that everything is privatized practice and belief. Right. You see what I'm saying? There's not always a shared practice. So what happens is that it's about what I want and how I want to practice the deed. And it becomes a fight over everything from dress to when am I going to go out with my friends to what I do on social media to don't control me to this, to that. See what I'm saying? And it's between husband and wife. Most of the times it's between husband and wife. And a lot of times this stuff has to do with attention. That's what she says they're building the deeper connection. The husband and wife are not giving each other attention. And she mentions the issue of physical intimacy, right? And how when that is not in place, physical intimacy, I'm not talking about touch. I'm talking about husband-wife physical intimacy. When that's not in place, everything opens up. Because part of marriage is that reality. So it goes to another direction. The same thing when there's no compliment, you look beautiful today, or taking care of yourself, or taking care of the way you look. At the end of the day, what ends up happening is what? The person is going to seek attention from somewhere else, or they're just going to go into depression. That's the younger generation. That's the issue, of the younger generation. And that's here what she says two things. If you have a past that keeps hurting you in some manner or keeps showing up in your face from time to time, your partner should know about your past. That's from the angle of how you were raised that may have affected you negatively, but also how you understand the deen. The other issue is this, and this what we already mentioned this, a conversation about self-improvement. If you know that your partner detests certain habits that you have, such as eating unhealthy or smoking or drinking, or even for younger brothers, especially and sisters, they want to be with their friends all the time and they're married. They don't know how to distinguish between married life and community life, or they don't know how to bring that into balance. That has to be discussed. Discussing what should be improved in the relationship is something that most of the times doesn't happen. It happens not as a discussion, it happens as a person letting you know, I don't like this, or you're bothering me. But it doesn't happen as an actual discussion. How can we better our relationship? How can we reach a point where we can work together on these things? And we get comfortable. That's the problem of marriage, that we get comfortable. We don't talk about self-growth. That's why in chapter 6, and we start bringing this to an end, she talks about introducing new routines. So she says that there's certain things which are stable, which make the relationship stable and should be constantly in place, like saying I love you. Some cultures, we don't do that. But in this society, with the way that we're mixing, what has happened with the internet and with the transformation, we have to make sure, because people, what do they do? Even if that's not from their culture, they watch a TV program, you know what I'm saying? Or they go on a YouTube video, or they're on Facebook, or they're on Instagram, and they hear these things about relationship. Well, my partner never tells me that he or she loves me. He must not love me. You see what I'm saying? So that's one thing. And then even in Islam, we have that concept. If you feel love for the person, tell them that you love them for the sake of Allah. So what more so in the husband-wife relationship to express that? Supporting your partner, like we said, in times of hardship. Listening to the partner. Listening means not you talk, but you listen. And then the other part is communicating, where there's an exchange of ideas when you talk. But listening to the other person and letting them speak is something that should constantly be there. Paying attention to your partner, giving them time. That's the issue that we have across the board. All of us have that problem now. Even in Salah, we can't even pray without the phone going off. Right? In other words, we're not even paying attention to our own Salah. So what about the marriages? Even the parent-child relationship. Even friends. Because we're addicted to the whole issue of the cell phone. The issue of showing affection, the issue of caring, the issue of praying. Together, we mentioned all of those things. And then, so ultimately, in the end, what? To do new things. Let's try something new. Let's change the thing up. Let's travel, right? Let's do something different, something that we're not doing. Let's take on a new habit, right? Let's improve ourselves. Let's look after our health. Let's take a vacation. Let's do different things. Let's try different things. So those are the things that she talks about, in terms of what is good to build deeper connections together, and with that we end, inshallah.